The autumn of 1986 painted the sleepy town of Cedar Creek, Oregon, in hues of amber and gold, a picturesque backdrop for a tragedy that would haunt its residents for decades. It was here that Julian Hayes, a gifted 19-year-old artist with a spirit as vibrant as his canvases, simply ceased to exist. One crisp October evening, he walked out of his family's small, paint-splattered bungalow, carrying nothing but his worn leather sketchbook and a set of charcoal pencils, and was never seen again. His mother, Eleanor, remembers the scent of damp earth and pine needles clinging to the air that night, a scent that would forever be intertwined with the gnawing emptiness of his absence. The front door clicked shut behind him, a soft final sound that echoed into a void of unanswered questions. Julian was not the type of young man to disappear without a word. His life was an open book, much like the sketchbooks he filled with the faces and landscapes of his small world. He was deeply devoted to his art, spending countless hours capturing the subtle play of light on the creek's surface, or the weathered lines on an elderly neighbor's face. His family described him as sensitive and introspective, a soul who found his voice not in words, but in the bold strokes of his charcoal and the vibrant swirls of his oil paints. His father, a stoic lumbermill worker named Frank, often mused that Julian saw the world in a different spectrum, one invisible to the rest of them. That evening, Julian had been sketching the ancient oak tree at the edge of their property, a sentinel that had stood for centuries. The initial search was frantic, a blur of flashing police lights against the dense dark woods that bordered the Hayes property. Sheriff Brody, a man whose placid demeanor was rarely rattled, coordinated teams of volunteers who combed through the tangled underbrush, their calls of Julian swallowed by the vast, indifferent wilderness. The air grew colder, with each passing hour mirroring the icy dread that gripped Eleanor's heart. She clutched one of Julian's half-finished paintings, a portrait of his younger sister, Sarah, its familiar colors offering a fragile warmth against the encroaching chill of reality. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig, sent a jolt of desperate hope through the search party, a hope that would repeatedly be dashed against the unyielding silence of the forest. Sarah, only 15 at the time, remembers the oppressive quiet that fell over their home in the days that followed. The scent of turpentine and linseed oil, once a comforting aroma that signaled her brother's presence, now felt like a ghostly reminder of what they had lost. She would sit in his empty room for hours, tracing the outlines of his sketches, trying to find a clue, a hidden message, in the familiar lines of his art. His bed was neatly made, his art supplies were organized with meticulous care, everything in its place except for Julian himself. The world outside his window, once a source of endless inspiration, now seemed menacing and secretive, holding its breath and its secrets close. The investigation soon hit a wall, the lack of any physical evidence or credible leads, leaving Sheriff Brody and his small department grasping at straws. They interviewed friends, classmates, and neighbors, painting a picture of a well-liked, albeit solitary, young man with no known enemies or personal troubles. There was no note, no sign of a struggle, no indication that he had planned to leave. It was as if the very ground had opened up and swallowed him whole, leaving behind only the vibrant canvases that now seemed to mock the family with their silent, colorful testimony. The case files grew thicker with reports of dead-end sightings and unsubstantiated theories, each one a paper-thin layer covering the raw wound of his disappearance. As days bled into weeks, and weeks into months, the national media's fleeting interest waned, and the search parties dwindled. The townsfolk of Cedar Creek, once united in their efforts, slowly returned to their own lives, the urgency of the situation fading into a persistent, sorrowful murmur. The missing posters bearing Julian's smiling, youthful face began to weather and peel, his image slowly fading like a forgotten photograph. For the Hayes family, however, time offered no such respite. Their lives became a relentless cycle of waiting, of listening for a footstep on the porch that never came, of scanning crowds for a familiar face that was never there. The vibrant colors of their world had been muted, washed out by a grief that was as constant as the Oregon rain. Eleanor Hayes refused to let her son's memory fade. Each year, on the anniversary of his disappearance, she would place a fresh bouquet of his favorite wildflowers at the base of the old oak tree he had been sketching that fateful evening. It was a silent vigil, a mother's unwavering promise to her lost child that he would not be forgotten. She would talk to him, her voice a soft whisper against the rustling leaves, sharing the small details of their lives, of Sarah's graduation, of Frank's retirement. It was a one-sided conversation filled with a love that time could not diminish, a testament to a bond that even his inexplicable absence could not sever. The case of Julian Hayes became one of Cedar Creek's enduring mysteries, a local ghost story whispered among new generations. The old oak tree at the edge of the Hayes property stood as a silent monument to the vanished artist, its gnarled branches reaching towards the sky like skeletal fingers. The world moved on. Technology advanced, and the small town of Cedar Creek slowly changed, but the story of the boy who walked into the woods with his sketchbook and never returned remained frozen in time. A chilling reminder of how quickly a life can be erased, leaving only questions in its wake. Years later, Sarah, now a grown woman with a family of her own, would often find herself drawn back to that old oak tree. She would trace its rough bark with her fingertips, the same bark her brother had so meticulously rendered in his drawings. The tree held a certain power, a silent knowledge that she couldn't quite decipher. It was as if it was guarding a secret, its roots buried deep in the earth. Intertwined with the mystery of her brother's fate, she felt a profound connection to the tree, seeing it not just as a plant, but as the last witness to Julian's final moments on this earth. And so, for 26 years, the mystery of Julian Hayes lay dormant, a cold case buried under layers of time and forgotten files. The vibrant artist, once so full of life and promise, had been reduced to a fading photograph and a collection of unanswered questions. The world had all but given up on finding him, accepting his disappearance as an unsolvable enigma. But deep within the heart of the ancient oak, hidden from sight and protected from the elements, a story was waiting to be told, a story sketched in charcoal on the brittle pages of a long-lost book. 26 years is a lifetime. It's long enough for a sapling to grow into a sturdy tree, for a teenager to become a parent, and for hope to wither into a dull, persistent ache. By the spring of 2012, the disappearance of Julian Hayes had become a piece of local folklore in Cedar Creek, a sad tale told to newcomers to illustrate the wild, untamed nature of the surrounding forests. The Hayes family, now smaller and older, had learned to live with the ghost of their lost son and brother. The sharp edges of their grief softened by the relentless passage of time, but the void he left remained a constant, palpable presence. In their lives, Frank Hayes had passed away a few years prior, his heart finally giving out after a lifetime of hard work and quiet sorrow. Eleanor, now in her late 60s, still lived in the same small bungalow, the walls adorned with Julian's vibrant artwork, a colorful shrine to her lost boy. Sarah, a successful landscape architect living in Portland, visited her mother every weekend, the two women bound together by their shared loss and an unspoken understanding of each other's pain. The house, once filled with the creative chaos of a young artist, was now a quiet sanctuary of memories, each object imbued with a story, a connection to the boy who was no longer there. The old oak tree, the silent sentinel at the edge of their property, had grown even larger and more imposing over the years, its branches casting long, intricate shadows across the yard. It had become a landmark, a living monument to the town's enduring mystery. Children dared each other to touch its ancient bark, whispering stories of the ghost of the boy artist who roamed the woods at night. For Eleanor, the tree was a place of solace, a connection to Julian's last known moments. She still left her bouquets of wildflowers at its base, a ritual that had become as much a part of her life as breathing. One particularly stormy afternoon in April of 2012, the years of wind and rain finally took their toll on the ancient oak. A massive, gnarled branch, weakened by age and disease, cracked and fell with a thunderous crash, narrowly missing the roof of the Hayes home. The sound was like a gunshot in the otherwise quiet afternoon, a violent disruption of the peaceful landscape. It was a startling event, one that would inadvertently set in motion a chain of events that would dredge up the past in the most unexpected way. The task of removing the fallen limb fell to a local tree removal service. Two young men, barely older than Julian had been when he disappeared, arrived with chainsaws and safety harnesses, their banter and laughter a stark contrast to the somber history of the place. As they began to cut the massive branch into smaller, more manageable pieces, one of the workers noticed something unusual. Tucked deep within a hollowed-out section of the branch, almost completely encased by years of new wood growth, was a dark, rectangular object, It was a discovery that would change everything. Curiosity piqued. The young man carefully pried the object from its wooden tomb. It was a leather-bound book, its cover warped and stiff from years of confinement. The leather cracked and faded. He could just make out the faint, embossed initials J.H. on the front. Recognizing the significance of the find in a town where everyone knew the story of Julian Hayes, he immediately stopped his work and called out to his partner. They knew, with a certainty that sent a shiver down their spines, that they were holding a piece of history, a relic from a decades-old mystery. Word of the discovery spread through Cedar Creek like wildfire. The tree removal workers, understanding the gravity of their find, carefully carried the sketchbook to the local sheriff's department, now housed in a modern building, but still home to the ghosts of old cases. The news reached Sarah while she was at work in Portland, a phone call from her mother that sent a jolt of adrenaline and a wave of trepidation through her. After 26 years of silence, a piece of her brother had resurfaced, a voice from the past that had been trapped in the heart of a tree. The sketchbook was treated with the reverence of a sacred artifact. It was carefully transported to the state crime lab, where forensic experts would painstakingly work to preserve its fragile pages and uncover the secrets they held. For Sarah and Eleanor, the discovery was a double-edged sword. Brought a fresh surge of hope, a tangible link to Julian after so many years of nothingness, but it also reopened old wounds, forcing them to confront the painful reality of his disappearance all over again, to relive the uncertainty and the fear that had defined their lives for so long. As the news broke, the media descended on Cedar Creek once more, their satellite trucks and reporters a jarring intrusion into the town's quiet routine. The story of the vanished artist and the sketchbook found in a tree captured the public's imagination. A real-life fairy tale with a dark, mysterious twist. The case of Julian Hayes was no longer a cold file gathering dust in a cabinet. It was a front-page story, a national sensation. The pressure was on for the investigators to finally solve the puzzle that had baffled their predecessors for over 2 decades. For the first time in 26 years, there was a real, tangible clue. The sketchbook, a silent witness to Julian's final hours, held the promise of answers. It was a voice from the grave, a collection of images and perhaps even words that could finally shed light on what happened that autumn evening in 1986. The entire town of Cedar Creek, and indeed the nation, held its breath, waiting to see what secrets the young artist's final sketches would reveal. The silent witness was about to speak. The Oregon State Police Forensics Laboratory was a world away from the tranquil, pine-scented air of Cedar Creek. It was a sterile environment of stainless steel, humming machinery, and the faint, antiseptic smell of chemicals. Here, under the bright, unforgiving lights of the lab, Julian Hayes's sketchbook, his final testament, was carefully coaxed back to life. The delicate process of separating the brittle, water-damaged pages was painstaking. A surgical procedure performed by experts who understood they were not just handling evidence, but the last creative embers of a young man's life. Detective Miles Corbin, a seasoned investigator with the state's cold case unit, was assigned to lead the renewed investigation. Corbin was a man of quiet intensity, his face etched with the stories of countless tragedies he had shouldered over the years. He approached the sketchbook with a mixture of professional detachment and profound reverence. He knew that within its fragile pages lay the best, and perhaps only, chance of finally bringing closure to the Hayes family. He sat in on the forensic analysis, watching as each carefully preserved page was photographed and digitized, the images slowly appearing on a large monitor, ghosts from a bygone era. The initial pages of the sketchbook were familiar, a poignant journey through Julian's world in the weeks leading up to his disappearance. There were detailed sketches of his mother's hands, wrinkled and gentle as they tended to her garden. There were quick, energetic drawings of his sister Sarah, her teenage awkwardness and youthful exuberance captured with a loving, brotherly eye. He had sketched the familiar landmarks of Cedar Creek, the worn pews of the old church, the steam rising from the coffee cups at the local diner, the intricate patterns of bark on the trees in his own backyard. Each drawing was a testament to his talent, his ability to find beauty in the mundane. As the forensic team delved deeper into the sketchbook, however, the tone of the drawings began to shift. The familiar, comforting scenes gave way to darker, more unsettling imagery. There were sketches of faces, unfamiliar, and rendered with a nervous, frantic energy that was uncharacteristic of Julian's typically precise style. These were not the friendly, weathered faces of his neighbors. They were angular and shadowed, their eyes holding a glint of something cold and menacing. One recurring face, a man with a distinctive scar above his left eyebrow, appeared several times, each time with a more sinister expression. The landscapes also changed. The serene, sun-dappled forests of his earlier drawings were replaced by dark, claustrophobic woods, the trees like grasping claws, the shadows deep and foreboding. He had sketched an old, dilapidated cabin, its windows like vacant eyes, a place that no one in Cedar Creek could recall ever seeing. There was a sense of urgency in these later sketches, the lines quick and jagged, as if drawn by a hand trembling with fear. It was a stark departure from the peaceful world he had so lovingly captured before, a visual descent into a private nightmare. Interspersed with these disturbing images were handwritten notes, short, cryptic phrases scrawled in the margins. "They're watching the house," one note read, the letters small and cramped. "He said to keep quiet," said another, followed by a hastily drawn sketch of a hand covering a mouth. The most chilling note was found on the last preserved page, beside a frantic, almost abstract drawing of a rusty pickup truck. He promised Sarah would be next. The words hit Detective Corbin like a physical blow, transforming the cold case into a chillingly immediate threat. The discovery of the note mentioning Sarah sent a shockwave through the investigation. Julian's disappearance was no longer just a tragic, unsolved mystery. It was now potentially linked to a threat against his sister, a threat that had lain dormant for 26 years. Corbin immediately drove to Cedar Creek to speak with Sarah. In person, he found her in her mother's garden, the two women finding a fragile peace amongst the blooming flowers. The news that Julian's last known thoughts were of her safety, of a threat against her, was a devastating revelation. The sketchbook provided a terrifying new narrative. It suggested that Julian hadn't just wandered off and gotten lost in the woods. He had stumbled upon something dangerous, something that had cost him his life. The recurring face with the scar, the dilapidated cabin, the rusty pickup truck, these were no longer just drawings. They were clues, pieces of a puzzle that had been hidden for over a quarter of a century. The ghost on the page was not just Julian, it was the specter of a killer who may have been living freely all these years. The investigation now had a clear, albeit chilling, direction. They needed to identify the man with the scar, locate the cabin in the woods, and find out what Julian had seen that was so dangerous it had to be silenced. The sketchbook had provided a roadmap, a ghostly guide into the heart of the darkness that had consumed Julian Hayes. The sketches, once a source of comfort and a reminder of his talent, had become a testament to his final, terrifying days. Detective Corbin drove away from the Hayes home that evening. The weight of his promise to Sarah and Eleanor settled heavily upon him. He clutched the digitized images of the sketchbook on his tablet, the faces of Julian's ghosts staring back at him from the screen. The silent witness had spoken, its voice a chorus of charcoal lines and frantic scribbles. Now, it was up to Corbin to translate that ghostly testimony into justice, to finally give a name to the faceless evil that had haunted Cedar Creek for so long. The image of the man with the scar, rendered with an almost photographic memory by Julian's terrified hand, became the focal point of the renewed investigation. Detective Corbin's team released the sketch to the public, and it was splashed across news channels, websites, and newspapers throughout the Pacific Northwest. The face was striking, gaunt, with deep-set, hollow eyes, and a jagged, angry scar that cut a stark white line through his left eyebrow. It was a face that, once seen, was not easily forgotten. The hope was that someone, somewhere, would recognize him. That passage of 26 years had not completely erased his memory from the community. Tips began to pour into the task force hotline, a deluge of well-intentioned, but ultimately fruitless leads. People saw the face in strangers at the grocery store, in old high school yearbooks, in half-forgotten memories of transient workers who had passed through Cedar Creek decades ago. Corbin and his team meticulously followed up on every lead, no matter how tenuous, but each one led to a dead end. The scarred man remained a ghost, a phantom who had seemingly left no other trace of his existence in the town's history. The initial wave of public excitement began to wane, replaced by a familiar sense of frustration. Sarah, haunted by the revelation that her brother's disappearance was linked to a threat against her, found herself adrift in a sea of long-suppressed memories. The cryptic note, "He promised Sarah would be next," echoed in her mind, casting a sinister shadow over her teenage years. She spent hours poring over old photographs and diaries, searching for any clue, any forgotten detail that might connect. To Julian's final days, she remembered him being more withdrawn and anxious in the weeks before he vanished, his usual creative energy replaced by a quiet, brooding intensity. At the time, she had attributed it to artistic temperament, but now she saw it for what it was: fear. She recalled a specific incident, a memory that had been buried under the weight of her grief. About a month before he disappeared, Julian had come home late one evening, his clothes muddy and torn, his face pale and drawn. He had been out sketching near the old logging roads deep in the forest, a place he rarely ventured. When she asked him what was wrong, he had been evasive, simply saying he had stumbled upon something he shouldn't have seen. He made her promise not to tell their parents, a promise she had kept, a promise that now filled her with a profound sense of guilt. "It's better if they don't know, Sarah," he had whispered, his eyes wide with the fear she didn't understand. The time. Armed with this new information from Sarah, Detective Corbin refocused the search. He pulled old maps of the logging territories from the 1980s, cross-referencing them with Julian's sketches of the dark, claustrophobic woods. The area was vast and remote, a labyrinth of overgrown trails and clear-cut patches that had long since been reclaimed by nature. He organized a search team, composed of experienced forest rangers and volunteers, to systematically comb the area, looking for any sign of the dilapidated cabin from Julian's drawings. It was a monumental task, like searching for a needle in a haystack the size of a national park. Meanwhile, a retired sheriff's deputy from a neighboring county, a man named Hank Ridley, saw the sketch of the scarred man on the evening news. The face sparked a flicker of a memory, a ghost from an old unsolved case he had worked on back in the mid-80s. He spent the next day digging through his personal unofficial files, boxes of old notes and photographs stored in his dusty attic. After hours of searching, he found it, a faded Polaroid of a man he had arrested for illegal trapping in 1985. The man's face was younger, less gaunt, but the cold, empty eyes and the distinctive scar above his left eyebrow were unmistakable. His name was Thomas Vogel. The file on Thomas Vogel was thin. He was a drifter, a loner who had a history of petty crimes and a reputation for a volatile temper. He had lived for a time in a secluded cabin deep in the woods, making a living off the land through trapping and odd jobs. After his arrest, he had paid a small fine and disappeared, leaving no forwarding address. The location of his cabin, as noted in Hank's old report, was in the very same remote logging area that Corbin's team was about to search. The shadow of the scarred man was finally beginning to take a tangible form. The discovery of Thomas Vogel's identity sent a surge of energy through the investigation. Corbin's team now had a name, a history, and a location. They ran Vogel's name through every database available, searching for any sign of him in the intervening 26 years. They found that he had a string of minor offenses in several states, but had seemingly dropped off the grid entirely in the early 1990s. He was a ghost, but now he was a ghost with a name. The connection felt solid, a thread that could finally unravel the entire mystery. Corbin, along with a team of armed officers and forensic specialists, prepared to venture into the woods to find the cabin. There was a palpable sense of tension and anticipation in the air. They were not just searching for a dilapidated structure. They were stepping back in time, into the heart of Julian's nightmare. They were following the trail he had laid out for them in his sketchbook, a trail that led directly to the doorstep of a man with a scarred face and a dark past. As the team's vehicles rumbled down the overgrown logging road, the dense canopy of trees overhead plunged the path into a premature twilight. The air grew still and heavy, the sounds of the modern world fading away, replaced by the whispering of the wind through the ancient pines. They were entering Vogel's world now, the same world that Julian had stumbled into all those years ago. The question that hung unspoken in the air was what they would find at the end of the trail, and whether it would bring them closer to Julian, or only deeper into the darkness that had swallowed him. The journey to Thomas Vogel's last known whereabouts was a tense, arduous trek into the untamed heart of the Oregon wilderness. The logging road, little more than a dirt track on Hank Ridley's old map, had been almost entirely reclaimed by the forest. The team's four-wheel drive vehicles struggled over fallen trees and through muddy ravines, the dense foliage scraping against the windows like gnarled fingers, Detective Corbin felt a growing sense of unease, the feeling that they were trespassing on forbidden ground. The woods here felt different, older, and more menacing than the familiar forests surrounding Cedar Creek. After nearly 2 hours of slow, careful progress, they could go no further by vehicle. They continued on foot, guided by GPS coordinates taken from the old report and the hauntingly accurate sketches from Julian's book. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and decay. The silence was profound, broken only by the crunch of their boots on the forest floor and the occasional cry of a distant bird. The team moved with tactical precision, their senses on high alert, unsure of what, or who, they might find in this isolated corner of the world. It was a young state trooper who spotted it first, a faint wisp of smoke curling up into the sky from a ridge about a half-mile ahead. The sign of life was both a relief and a cause for alarm. It meant the cabin was likely still standing, but it also meant it could be occupied. Corbin called a halt, and the team proceeded with heightened caution, their weapons drawn. The closer they got, the more the scene began to resemble Julian's frantic drawings. The trees were unnaturally dense, their branches twisted and overlapping, creating a claustrophobic canopy that blocked out the sky. The cabin itself was a grim sight, a dilapidated structure that seemed to sag under the weight of its own dark history. It was just as Julian had sketched it, made of rough-hewn logs, with a sagging porch and windows that stared out like vacant, lifeless eyes. A rusty, dilapidated pickup truck, the same model from Julian's final chilling drawing, was parked nearby, half swallowed by overgrown blackberry bushes. The place radiated an aura of neglect and menace, a festering sore in the heart of the beautiful wilderness. As the team surrounded the cabin, a figure emerged from the front door, a man silhouetted against the dim light within. He was older, his hair a shock of wiry gray, his frame gaunt and stooped. But as he stepped into a clearing, the sunlight caught his face, and the team saw it clearly. The same cold, dead eyes from the sketch, and the jagged, white scar cutting through his left eyebrow. It was Thomas Vogel. He stared at the assembled officers, not with surprise or fear, but with a strange, unnerving calmness, as if he had been expecting them all along. Vogel offered no resistance as he was taken into custody. He remained eerily silent, his eyes fixed on some distant point, his face an unreadable mask. The team then began the meticulous process of searching the cabin and the surrounding property. The interior of the cabin was even more squalid and disturbing than its exterior suggested. It was cluttered with yellowing newspapers, animal traps, and strange, unsettling carvings made from bone and wood. The air was thick with the smell of unwashed bodies, stale food, and something else, something metallic and unpleasant that clung to the back of the throat. The forensic team, clad in white protective suits, moved through the cramped space with professional care. They documented every item, every stain, every scrap of potential evidence. In a back room, they found a collection of old photographs, faded Polaroids of people who looked lost and vulnerable, their faces captured in unguarded moments. Corbin felt a chill run down his spine as he looked at them, wondering if these were other victims, other lives that had intersected with Vogel's dark, predatory world. He prayed that he wouldn't find a picture of Julian among them. The most significant discovery was made outside, buried in a shallow, makeshift grave a few hundred yards from the cabin. Beneath a thin layer of soil and leaves, the team unearthed a small, corroded metal box. Inside, carefully wrapped in oilcloth, were several items: a tarnished silver locket containing a faded picture of a young woman, a set of keys, and a wallet. The wallet contained a driver's license, issued in 1984, belonging to a young woman named Rebecca Miles, who had been reported missing from a town 50 miles away a year before Julian vanished. The discovery confirmed their worst fears. Thomas Vogel was not just a reclusive trapper. He was a predator, a serial kidnapper, and likely a murderer. The cabin was his hunting ground, a place where he could bring his victims, far from the prying eyes of the world. Julian Hayes had not just stumbled upon something he shouldn't have seen. He had stumbled into a monster's lair. The pieces were falling into place, forming a picture of unimaginable horror. As the team prepared to leave the desolate property, Corbin took one last look at the cabin. The wisp of smoke they had seen earlier had come from a small wood-burning stove, its embers now dying out. The place would soon be cold and silent again, its secrets finally exposed to the light. They had found the monster from Julian's sketchbook, the scarred man who had haunted a family and a town for 26 years. But one crucial question remained unanswered. What had happened to Julian? His sketchbook had led them to his killer, but it had not yet led them to him. Thomas Vogel sat in the sterile, windowless interrogation room at the state police headquarters, a ghost from a forgotten time now thrust into the harsh, fluorescent glare of the present. He was a specter of a man, his body withered by age, and a life lived in the shadows, but his eyes, those cold, hollow eyes from Julian's sketch, still held a chilling intensity. For hours, he had remained silent, a stone wall of indifference. Against the barrage of questions from Detective Corbin and his partner, he offered nothing, admitted nothing. His silence, as profound and unnerving as the wilderness he called home. Corbin, growing frustrated with the stonewalling, decided to change his approach. He slid a large, high-resolution photograph across the metal table, a picture of Julian Hayes, smiling and vibrant, taken just weeks before he disappeared. Vogel's eyes flickered towards the image, and for the first time, a subtle, almost imperceptible change crossed his features. It was not remorse, or even recognition, but something else, something darker, a faint, contemptuous curl of his lip. Corbin knew he had struck a nerve. "He drew you, you know," Corbin said, his voice low and steady. "The boy you took. He was an artist. He drew your face, your truck, your cabin. He left us a map, Vogel. A map that led us straight to you after 26 years. He placed several of Julian's sketches on the table next to the photograph. Charcoal drawings, a stark, damning testament to the truth. The scarred face, the rusty pickup, the dilapidated cabin, they were all there, a silent chorus of accusation. Vogel stared at the drawings, his gnarled fingers twitching slightly. He seemed to be seeing not just the images on the paper, but the memory of the boy who had created them. A low, guttural sound, something between a sigh and a growl, escaped his lips. "He was clever," Vogel rasped, his voice a dry, gravelly whisper. "Rough, from years of disuse. Too clever, too curious. Always watching, always drawing." The dam of his silence had finally cracked. Over the next few hours, coaxed by Corbin's patient but relentless questioning, the full story of that autumn evening in 1986 came tumbling out. It was a story of chilling coincidence and brutal, senseless violence. Vogel, it turned out, was not just a kidnapper and murderer. He was involved in a small-scale, but lucrative, poaching operation, a fact that explained his desire for seclusion and his violent aversion to outsiders. He confessed to the abduction and murder of Rebecca Miles, the young woman whose belongings were found buried near his cabin. He had held her captive for weeks before killing her, a detail he recounted with a horrifying lack of emotion. Julian, in his innocent pursuit of artistic inspiration, had ventured too far into the woods that day. He had stumbled upon Vogel's cabin by accident, and had witnessed something that sealed his fate. He had seen Vogel with another captive, a young hiker who had gone missing from the area just days before. Julian, terrified, had hidden and sketched what he saw, capturing the evidence of Vogel's crimes in the only way he knew how. He had documented the man, the truck, the cabin, creating a visual record of the horror he had witnessed. Vogel, ever paranoid and hyper-aware of his surroundings, had spotted the boy watching him from the edge of the woods. He had seen the sketchbook in his hands. He knew the boy was a witness, a threat that had to be neutralized. He described how he had stalked Julian through the woods as the boy fled back towards his home, a predator hunting his prey. The detail about the note mentioning Sarah was a calculated act of cruelty. Vogel had overheard Julian muttering his sister's name in fear, and had used it as a threat to ensure the boy's silence before he captured him. "I told him if he made a sound, if he ever told anyone what he saw, the girl would be next," Vogel said, his voice devoid of any empathy. The confession was a brutal, heartbreaking confirmation of what the Hayes family and the investigators had long feared. Julian was not a runaway. He was a hero. He had died because he had seen something evil and had tried, in his own unique way, to expose it. His art, his passion, had become his death warrant. He had left behind a legacy, not just in the vibrant canvases that hung on his mother's walls, but in the charcoal sketches that had finally brought his killer to justice. Corbin felt a wave of profound sadness wash over him. The mystery was solved. The monster was caught, but it was a hollow victory. It couldn't bring Julian back. It couldn't erase 26 years of pain and uncertainty for his family. The confession was a necessary evil, a dark chapter that had to be read in order to finally close the book on this tragic story. As Vogel continued his chilling, dispassionate narrative, describing how he had disposed of the evidence and hidden the sketchbook in the hollow of the tree branch, thinking it would rot away into oblivion, Corbin knew that the most difficult part of his job was yet to come. He had to deliver this horrific truth to Eleanor and Sarah Hayes. He had to tell them how their beloved Julian had died, and how his final thoughts were of protecting his family. The confession, drawn out in the cold, sterile interrogation room, was a grim echo of the charcoal sketches that had started it all. Both were a form of testimony, a story told in black and white. One was a testament to a young man's talent and bravery, the other a testament to a monster's depravity, and somewhere in the space between those two stories lay the heartbreaking truth of what had happened to Julian Hayes. The drive back to Cedar Creek was the longest of Detective Corbin's career. The weight of Thomas Vogel's confession settled in his gut like a leaden stone. He had the answers he had sought, the truth that had been buried for 26 years, but it was a truth so brutal, so devoid of solace, that he dreaded the moment he would have to share it. How do you tell a mother that her son's last moments were filled with terror, that he died at the hands of a monster? How do you tell a sister that her brother's final act was to try and protect her from an evil she never even knew existed? Found Eleanor and Sarah sitting together on the porch swing, the same place where they had shared so many quiet moments of hope and despair over the years. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the yard, painting the world in the same soft, melancholic light that Julian had so often captured in his art. Corbin approached them slowly, his face a grim mask that told them everything they needed to know before he even spoke a word. The fragile hope that had been rekindled by the discovery of the sketchbook flickered and died in their eyes. With gentle, measured words, Corbin recounted the story of Julian's final hours, omitting the most graphic details but conveying the essential, heartbreaking truth. He told them about Vogel, about the other victims, about the poaching operation that Julian had stumbled upon. He told them that Julian had not been a victim of a random accident, but of a calculated act of violence. He explained that Julian's last known thoughts, the ones he had scrawled in the margins of his sketchbook, were not of his own fate, but of Sarah's safety. He was not just a victim. He was a silent guardian, a hero who had tried to warn them. From beyond the grave, the impact of the news was devastating. Eleanor let out a soft, wounded cry, a sound of pure, undiluted maternal anguish that seemed to hang in the still air. She clutched a locket around her neck, a small, silver oval containing a miniature portrait Julian had painted of her when he was just a boy. Sarah, her face pale and etched with a mixture of grief and a newfound, terrible understanding, wrapped her arms around her mother, the two women clinging to each other as the full weight of the truth crashed down upon them. The questions that had haunted them for decades had been answered, but the answers brought no peace, only a different, more profound kind of pain. According to Vogel's confession, after he had killed Julian, he had buried his body in a remote, unmarked location deep within the national forest, miles from the cabin. He claimed he had chosen the spot at random, a place so isolated that he was certain it would never be found. He provided a crude, hand-drawn map, his memory of the terrain still sharp, despite the passage of time. And so, a new search began, not for a missing person, but for a final resting place. The goal was no longer to bring Julian home alive, but simply to bring him home. The search for Julian's remains was a somber, solemn affair. A team of forensic anthropologists, accompanied by Corbin and a small group of officers, followed Vogel's crude map into the dense, unforgiving wilderness. They used ground-penetrating radar and specially trained cadaver dogs, sweeping the area that Vogel had indicated. For days, they searched, the task feeling both urgent and heartbreakingly futile. The forest, which had been the source of so much of Julian's artistic inspiration, was now the keeper of his final, dark secret. Finally, on the fourth day of the search, one of the dogs gave a positive alert at the base of a small, rocky outcrop, near a stream that matched the description on Vogel's map. The team began to excavate the area with meticulous care, removing the layers of soil and rock that had accumulated over 26 years. And then, they found him. The remains were skeletal, but the forensic anthropologist was able to quickly confirm, through dental records and the presence of a small, silver ring Julian always wore. that they had found what was left of the vanished artist. The discovery brought a strange, hollow sense of closure. Julian Hayes had been found. His long, silent vigil in the wilderness was over. His family could finally lay him to rest, give him a proper burial, a place where they could come to mourn and to remember. The unquiet grave, which had held its secret for so long, had finally given up its dead. The forest, which had swallowed him whole, had finally let him go. Corbin stood by as the remains were carefully and respectfully recovered. He looked out at the peaceful, sun-dappled forest, a place of stunning natural beauty that had been the backdrop for such an ugly, violent act. He thought of the young artist who had come here seeking inspiration and had found only death. He thought of the sketches, the charcoal lines that had reached across time and space to point the way to justice. The case was officially closed. The file stamped with the cold, final word, homicide. But for the Hayes family, the story was far from over. The discovery of Julian's remains was not an ending, but the beginning of a new chapter of grief, one that was no longer defined by uncertainty, but by the stark, brutal finality of the truth. They now had a grave to visit, a place to lay flowers, but the vibrant, smiling boy from their memories would forever be trapped in the amber of 1986, his life a masterpiece that had been violently, senselessly left unfinished. The trial of Thomas Vogel was a somber affair that captured the attention of the entire nation. It was held, not in the small, quiet town of Cedar Creek, but in a larger, more secure courthouse in Portland. A concession to the intense media scrutiny and the gravity of the crimes. For weeks, the courtroom was a stage for a tragedy that had spanned decades. Its cast of characters, a collection of grieving family members, seasoned law enforcement officers, and a killer whose soulless indifference sent a chill through everyone who watched him. Vogel, gaunt and impassive in his prison jumpsuit, sat through the proceedings like a disinterested spectator, his scarred face an unreadable mask of stone. Detective Miles Corbin was the prosecution's star witness. He walked the jury through the entire investigation, from the moment the sketchbook was discovered in the fallen oak branch to the grim unearthing of Julian's remains. He presented the sketches themselves as evidence, projecting the haunting charcoal images onto a large screen for the jury to see. He spoke of Julian's talent, his bravery, and the chilling accuracy of the clues he had left behind. His testimony painted a vivid picture of a young man who, in his final moments, had become an unwitting detective. His art, the only weapon he had against the evil he had discovered. Sarah Hayes took the stand, her voice trembling but steady, her presence radiating a quiet, dignified strength. She told the jury about her brother, about his passion for art, about the gentle, sensitive soul he had been. She recounted the memory of him coming home that night, pale and frightened, after seeing something in the woods, a memory that now carried the crushing weight of hindsight. Her testimony was not about the evidence or the timeline. It was about the human cost of Vogel's crimes, about the vibrant life that had been extinguished, and the family that had been shattered in its wake. She spoke not just for Julian, but for all of Vogel's victims, giving a voice to those he had silenced forever. The defense's case was weak, almost non-existent. They could not refute the confession, nor could they explain away the mountain of physical evidence. The sketchbook, the belongings of Rebecca Miles, the DNA evidence that tied Vogel to the crime scenes, and finally, Julian's remains. They attempted to paint Vogel as a mentally unstable, delusional old man, a victim of his own paranoid fantasies, but the prosecution's portrayal of him as a cunning, methodical predator was far more convincing. His own cold, detached demeanor in the courtroom did little to help his case. The most powerful moment of the trial came when Julian's sketchbook was entered into evidence. The actual book, its pages now carefully preserved in plastic sleeves, was passed from juror to juror. They held in their hands the last tangible thing Julian had created, the book he had clutched in his final, terrified hours. They saw the shift in his art, from the peaceful landscapes of his hometown to the dark, frantic scrawls of his nightmare. They saw the face of the man sitting just feet away from them, captured in charcoal by his victim. It was a visceral, emotional connection to the crime that no amount of legal argument could diminish. The jury's deliberation was swift. After only a few hours, they returned with a verdict: guilty on all counts. Murder, kidnapping, and a string of other charges that would ensure Thomas Vogel would spend the rest of his life in a prison cell, a cage of concrete and steel, to replace the one he had built for himself in the woods. There was no outburst of emotion in the courtroom, no cheers or tears of joy. There was only a quiet, collective sigh of relief, a sense of grim satisfaction that justice, after a long and painful delay, had finally been served. For Eleanor and Sarah, the verdict was not a victory, but a conclusion. It was the final, formal acknowledgement of their loss, the closing of a legal chapter that had dominated their lives for months. It would not bring Julian back. It would not heal the wounds that had been carved so deeply into their hearts, but it was something. It was an assurance that the man who had taken so much from them would never be able to harm another soul. It was an echo of justice, a faint but clear sound in the vast silence of their grief. After the verdict was read, Sarah addressed the media on the courthouse steps. She held up a framed photograph of her brother, his smiling face a stark contrast to the somber mood of the day. "This is not about vengeance," she said, her voice clear and strong. "This is about remembrance. It's about ensuring that my brother, Julian Hayes, is remembered not for how he died, but for who he was, a kind, gentle, and incredibly talented young man. His art was his voice, and in the end, his art spoke the truth. Today, that truth was heard." The trial brought a legal end to the case, but the emotional and psychological reverberations would continue for years to come. The story of Julian Hayes, the boy artist who solved his own murder from beyond the grave, became a permanent part of Cedar Creek's history, a cautionary tale about the darkness that can lie hidden just beyond the edge of a peaceful town. The verdict provided a sense of order, a reassertion that even after decades of silence, the truth can find a way to surface, and that justice, however delayed, can ultimately prevail. In the years that followed the trial, the town of Cedar Creek found a way to heal, to incorporate the tragic story of Julian Hayes into the fabric of its community, not as a source of fear, but as a testament to remembrance and resilience. The initial shock and the lurid fascination of the media circus faded, replaced by a quiet, collective desire to honor the memory of the young artist who had been one of their own. The story was no longer a ghost story whispered by children, but a poignant local history lesson about loss, bravery, and the enduring power of art. Sarah Hayes, in collaboration with the Cedar Creek community, spearheaded a project to create a lasting memorial for her brother. They decided against a traditional statue or plaque. Instead, they transformed the old, disused community hall into the Julian Hayes Memorial Gallery and Art Center. It was a vibrant, welcoming space filled with natural light, a place where local artists, young and old, could create, learn, and display their work. It was a fitting tribute, a living, breathing legacy that celebrated the passion that had defined Julian's short life. The centerpiece of the gallery was a permanent exhibition of Julian's work. His family donated all of his surviving canvases, the colorful, vibrant paintings that showcased his extraordinary talent. His early, joyful landscapes of Cedar Creek hung alongside his sensitive, insightful portraits of its residents. The gallery became a place of pilgrimage for people from all over the country who had been touched by his story. They came to see the art created by the boy whose final sketches had brought a killer to justice. They saw not just the tragedy of his end, but the beauty of his life. The sketchbook itself, after being released from evidence, was treated with the care and reverence of a historical artifact. It was too fragile and too intimately connected to the crime to be put on public display. Instead, high-quality digital facsimiles were created. One copy was given to the Hayes family, a private, painful memento of Julian's final days. Another was housed in a special exhibit at the gallery, displayed under glass, allowing visitors to see the chilling progression of his final drawings and the cryptic notes that had solved the mystery. It served as a powerful, silent narrator of his story. Eleanor Hayes, in her final years, found a measure of peace in the gallery. She would spend her afternoons there, sitting quietly on a bench, surrounded by her son's work. She would watch the young art students, their faces full of concentration and creative energy, and she would see a reflection of her own boy. The gallery was not a place of mourning for her. It was a place of connection, a place where spirit felt alive and present. She passed away peacefully a few years after the gallery opened, and was buried next to her husband and her son in the Cedar Creek Cemetery. Sarah, now the sole keeper of her family's story, found her own way to carry on Julian's legacy. She established a scholarship fund in his name, an annual award given to a promising young artist from a rural community in Oregon, providing them with the resources to pursue their artistic education. It was her way of ensuring that other young talents, like her brother, would have the chance to see their dreams realized. It was a way of creating something positive, something hopeful. From the ashes of her family's tragedy, the old Hayes bungalow was eventually sold. But the new owners, aware of its history, treated it with respect. The old oak tree at the edge of the property, the place where it all began, continued to stand tall, its missing branch a visible scar, a reminder of the secret it had held for so long. It was no longer a place of fear or sorrow, but a symbol of the town's enduring strength, its roots running deep into a history that was both tragic and triumphant. The story of Julian Hayes became a canvas of memory, painted with strokes of sorrow, bravery, love, and community. It was a reminder that even in the face of unimaginable darkness, the human spirit can find a way to create light. Julian's life had been cut short, his potential left unfulfilled, but his legacy was far greater than he could have ever imagined. He had become more than just a vanished artist. He had become a symbol of how art can be a voice for the voiceless, a light in the darkness, and a map that can, even after decades of silence, lead the way home. The gallery, the scholarship, the community that remembered him, these were the final, beautiful brushstrokes on the unfinished canvas of his life. They were a testament to the fact that while a life can be taken, a spirit, especially the spirit of an artist, can never truly be erased. It lives on in the memories of those who loved him, in the community he inspired, and in the powerful, silent truth of the art he left behind. The passage of time has a way of smoothing the sharp edges of even the most profound tragedies, transforming them into stories that we tell ourselves to make sense of the senseless. The tale of Julian Hayes, the vanished artist of Cedar Creek, is now one such story, a narrative of art, evil, and improbable justice that has settled into the annals of American true crime lore. The immediate pain has subsided, replaced by a lasting, poignant legacy that continues to resonate, a final, unexpected chapter in a life that was brutally cut short. The story is no longer about the monster in the woods, but about the enduring light of the boy who dared to draw him. The Julian Hayes Memorial Gallery and Art Center has become the vibrant heart of Cedar Creek. It is a place of creation, a testament to the community's ability to transform a site of collective trauma into a beacon of hope and creativity. The walls, once bare, are now a constantly changing tapestry of local art, a riot of color and expression that stands in defiant contrast to the dark silence of Julian's lost years. His own exhibition remains the gallery's anchor, his youthful talent a constant source of inspiration and a somber reminder of the potential that was lost. His story is told to every new student, a lesson not just in art, but in courage. Sarah Hayes continues to be the guardian of her brother's legacy. She has found a quiet purpose in her advocacy, speaking at victims' rights conferences and art education seminars. She shares Julian's story, not to dwell on the horror, but to highlight the extraordinary power of his final act. She speaks of the sketchbook as a symbol, a message in a bottle that washed ashore after 26 years, carrying a truth that refused to be silenced. Through her work with the Scholarship Fund, she has helped launch the careers of dozens of young artists, turning her family's personal tragedy into a source of opportunity for others. Thomas Vogel died in prison, an old, forgotten man whose passing went largely unnoticed by the world. He took with him the full, dark scope of his crimes, the true number of his victims likely never to be known. He remains a footnote in Julian's story, a shadowy figure defined not by his own life, but by the life he took. His cabin in the woods was eventually dismantled and removed by the state, erasing the physical scar he had left on the landscape. Though the memory of his evil would linger in the case files and the nightmares of those he had terrorized, most enduring legacy of the case, however, is the conversation it started about the nature of evidence and the unexpected ways in which the past can reassert itself. Julian's sketchbook became a case study in forensic science and criminal investigation, a textbook example of how a non-traditional clue, a piece of art, could be the key to unlocking a decades-old mystery. It challenged investigators to think outside the box, to look for the story not just in the fingerprints and the DNA, but in the more subtle, human traces that are left behind. The final pages of the real sketchbook, the ones too damaged to be fully restored, remain a source of quiet speculation. What other images did they hold? What other secrets did Julian attempt to record in his final, frantic moments? These unanswered questions are a poignant reminder that no story is ever truly complete, that there are always details that are lost to time, moments that exist only in the silent spaces between what is known and what can only be imagined. The sketchbook, for all it revealed, still holds a few of its secrets close. Asterisk, years from now, visitors to Cedar Creek will still hear the story of the boy artist. They will stand before the old oak tree, its scarred branch a visible testament to the tale. They will walk through the gallery that bears his name, looking at the world through his talented eyes. They will see the beauty he saw in the simple, quiet moments of life, a beauty that stood in such stark contrast to the ugliness of his death. The story serves as a powerful reminder that darkness can be confronted, that evil can be brought to justice, but that the loss of a life, the extinguishing of a creative spark, is an absolute and irreversible tragedy. Julian Hayes left the world, an unfinished masterpiece. His life, like one of his canvases, was a work in progress, full of vibrant color, deep sensitivity, and immense promise. While the final, violent slash of black paint across that canvas can never be erased, it is not the only thing that defines the work. The beauty, the talent, the love, and the courage that filled the canvas before that final, brutal stroke are what truly endure. His legacy is not the empty space he left behind, but the art and the truth he filled it with. The story of Julian Hayes does not end with a neat and tidy resolution, because true grief never truly ends. It ends with a quiet continuation, a legacy of art and remembrance that ripples outward, touching lives in ways he never could have foreseen. It is the story of how a young man's passion became his voice, a voice that was strong enough to echo through the decades, to unmask a monster, and to paint a final, indelible portrait of justice. The vanished artist of Cedar Creek, in the end, was never truly gone. He was simply waiting, in the heart of a tree, to be found.